Michael is calling from Ohio, pronouns are he, him. Michael's a theist that wants to talk about the problem of evil. How are you, sir?
Hey, Matt. Darante, how y'all doing?
Doing all right, man.
Not bad.
Yeah, Matt,
So what's up?
start out. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. What's
Yes.
up?
I just watched your video, the latest one you just put out on YouTube, in which you were discussing how your journey from believer to atheist and what you went through to kind of thresh out a deeper understanding of Christianity. And I'm very similar to that story in where I'm at currently. But whereas a lot of people that I see have deconstructed their faith, I feel like they have, from my position, done that unnecessarily at the expense of not believing in God, as if somehow the things written in the Bible were supposed to be accurate, and that they were supposed to tell us things about God that are true. And since they're not true, then therefore there is no God. I don't see how that follows from that. I
It doesn't.
accept an atheist position where they stand. I fully understand that. The God that I believe in is one which is all powerful, all knowing, and all good. I think any God less than that is can't do anything for evil. That's, as you know,
So does the God?
Philip Goff.
So
Okay,
first of all, I would agree with you that when somebody reaches the conclusion that the Bible is unreliable, that doesn't mean there isn't a God. Atheism is not the conclusion
Right.
there is no God. Atheism is the rejection of claims that there is. And I'm a skeptic, and I'll be convinced just as soon as there's evidence for it. So if you say you believe in an all-knowing, all-powerful, all-good God, the triple omni right there, is that what you're saying?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
So does God know my thoughts?
Yeah, God knows your thoughts, and God would know your thoughts even before you could think them, even before you were created or existed. God would know them.
So if God knows my thoughts, then God should know exactly what it would take to convince me that he's real, right?
Yeah, gotcha.
So why doesn't he do that?
Because he can't.
God can't convince me that he's real?
Now, the way that I view it is that if the nature of God is that which is all powerful, all knowing, all good, okay? God is infinite. There is no way for God to be able to confirm that, or else we would have to believe that God is not actually God. We would have to be to achieve a certain level epistemically to understand.
What you're saying right now, Michael, doesn't make any sense and isn't an answer to my question. So God knows what would change my mind, and God is all powerful, but God can't present the thing that would change my mind. I don't understand why.
What would God be able to do to show that God is all powerful? Control everything it is that's in our lives?
Michael, I don't know. I'm not the one that believes there's an all-powerful God. You are. And so you believe that there's a God that is all-powerful, and then you're telling me what God can't do. That doesn't sound all-powerful, and it doesn't seem reasonable to say that God knows what would change my mind, but he can't do it.
So it's along the sense of God cannot make a square circle. God cannot.
So you're saying it's impossible for me
us.
to be, you're saying it's impossible for me to be convinced reasonably that a God exists?
No, I'm not. And this is all through the problem of evil.
Michael, that was a yes or no question. Michael, that was a yes or no question. And so if it's not impossible and there is something that would convince me, then it's not a square circle that God is trying to do. So how can you assert that God can't do the thing that will change my mind? How is it you know more than God?
I don't know more than God, but
you just pretended like you did because you just asserted that God can't do something. And if you know that God can't do something, then you know more than God.
God is doing it right now would be what I would say. God is doing it in this life.
God's doing what? No,
Is,
Michael, he's not. Whatever it would be that would convince me, he knows what it is, and he is not doing it. And you said he's not doing it
Matt,
because he can't. Shut up and let me finish my thought. Shut up and let me finish my thought. You just said that God can't do it. And then when I pointed out that this was a contradiction with your position, now you're saying he's doing it right now. So which is the truth, and how do you know? Is he doing it right now, or is it that he can't do it?
God can't do it without allowing this world.
Without allowing this world. That's not even a complete sentence or thought. Darante, jump on in.
Yep. Okay. So I got just to clarify, because there's a lot going on here, Michael. What was your introduction to God, to belief in God? What was your introduction?
I was 6 years old, and was going to it doesn't matter. I believed in Jesus Christ because the story that was told to me was that there was somebody that cared about me.
Okay, so the Bible, the gospel message.
For me, it all comes back to the problem of evil. Look, I believe fine-tuning is not fine-tuning for life.
Wait a minute.
No, it's not fine-tuning for life. It's fine-tuning.
Michael, bruh.
Okay,
Michael,
I've muted Michael because Michael doesn't know how to have a conversation. So Durante's going to get to talk, and then I'm going to unmute Michael, and then you'll be able to say something again. So hang on.
Yes. All right. So from what I'm hearing here, Michael, he says that the Bible is flawed. That's kind of where he started the conversation off. And that's why I was asking the question, okay, what is your introduction to God? Because that's where he started this thing at. And it seems like it's the Bible message, the gospel message. He hears that this God loves him. All right, great. But you believe that the Bible is flawed. You open up the conversation by saying, okay, just because the Bible is flawed doesn't mean God is not real. Absolutely accurate. But I have some questions here. Man, I really wanted to have fun with you a little bit because I wanted to talk about Terminator. See, we were going to get to talk about Terminator, and you just robbed us of that opportunity, Michael. But we were going to talk about Terminator because there's a character in Terminator called Kyle Reese. Kyle Reese is the father of John Connor. Kyle Reese comes back from the future, and he impregnates Sarah Connor, and she gives birth to John Connor. All right, in this case, Kyle Reese is your introduction to God. John Connor is that God. In a timeline where Kyle Reese does not come and impregnate Sarah, Connor doesn't exist. This is actually where I wanted to get to with you. If the introduction is flawed, if Kyle Reese doesn't exist, you are making a lot of claims for God. I'm wondering where you're getting these claims from. You've already said the Bible is flawed, but not at any moment have you actually pointed to any verifiable system where you say, because one of your claims was God knows your thoughts. How do you know God knows our thoughts? So that's where I'll kind of leave it at right now. You've made several claims about these views that you have and these very absolutes about what this God can do, but you've also said the Bible is not your tool for knowing God. So in a very simple way, can you explain to us what is the mechanism, what is the method that you use to determine that God knows everybody's thoughts?
Right. So it would have to be through a philosophical understanding and presentation of what God would be. Now,
and where
I
would you
not
get that
the type
from?
of theist.
Where would you get that philosophical understanding
from philosophy through using logic, just as
Okay, use
you
logic.
two gentlemen
This would
would.
be a great opportunity to use logic.
So,
what logical process did you take to conclude that God knows everybody's thoughts?
It is.
Let me ask you this: Can I, Michael? Can I ask you this?
There is a God.
Let him answer.
Michael,
if God doesn't know my thoughts, why would I think that thing is a God? Then I would think that there is no such thing as a God.
So you are prioritizing, you are defining God, and if a God doesn't match your definition, you just dismiss him. Well, that's good to know.
If God doesn't match the definition of a God who can give me a reason for why God allows
your
evil,
definition.
then yes, I would dismiss.
Hang on, Michael, are you aware that plenty of other people believe in gods and they don't believe that God can know their thoughts? And so they believe in a God that is different from the one you're describing. But what Durante's asking you is, how do you know that God knows your thoughts? And your answer is, because if he doesn't, he's not God. That is completely circular. You are just defining the thing.
I'm
You are
not trying to be circular, Matt. I'm really not.
I don't care if you're trying to be circular. You are being circular. Stop interrupting me. You haven't demonstrated anything. You've declared it. We're asking you to demonstrate it. And saying that it doesn't match my preferred definition of God is not a demonstration of anything other than you are closed-minded.
Well, like I first started saying, anything less than a God which is all-knowing, if a God doesn't know my thoughts, that God's not all-knowing. There's reason to believe that God is not competent
Goodbye,
enough.
Michael. You are not ready for these conversations. Really? Yes, really. Yeah, you are not ready for these conversations, because we are sitting here explaining, and you're trying to appeal to philosophy and logic when every word out of your mouth, every word, interrupt me one more fucking time and you'll be banned. Every word out of your mouth demonstrates that you don't understand the basics of logic and that you don't understand the limits of philosophy. We would be happy to help you with that. We are asking the very questions that expose the flaws in your logic. We're saying, you say you have a definition of God, and anything that doesn't meet your definition of God doesn't count. Cool, whatever. That's not what we were asking. You can't just say, God must necessarily be able to read minds. And we say, how do you know that? Your answer is, because I have declared it thus. That is your answer. I have declared it thus. But you'll object and you'll say, no, that's not me. That's the definition of God. Well, you're wrong. There is no the definition of God. There are a variety of definitions of God. This is the one that you prefer and the one that makes sense to you, which is completely a separate issue from whether or not that God does exist or could even possibly exist. And so we're asking you, we don't even have to get to the problem of evil. You have advocated for an omnimax God, the God of classical theism, and you have said that there are things that God cannot do, and you have failed to even put together a single cogent sentence to describe why God, the all-powerful, cannot do the thing that would change my mind. And you know what else isn't going to change my mind? You interrupting and making assertions. I'll give you one more shot at this. How do you know that there is in fact a God who can read minds?
Now, we don't know what the nature of God is.
Cool. Okay. Goodbye.
I am.
Thanks for that admission. It took us 12 minutes and 50 seconds for you to acknowledge that you're spewing out views that you cannot demonstrate, which I said, don't call in and do that.
Hoy.
Do you acknowledge that it's a possibility that when we leave from this life, we could be standing in front of a God?
No.
But, okay, when you're talking about
possibility has never been demonstrated. You don't get to say it's a possibility until you can demonstrate that it is a possibility.
And you've actually overstepped the lines of possibility. You're not saying it's possible. You've made absolute claims about what you know this God is. So in order to say you know what God does, you'd have to already have the proof that God exists. And what you just did is you just said, we don't know for sure that God exists. It might be possible, but you don't realize how that's a contradiction to say, well, I don't know for sure if God exists, but I know for a fact he can read your thoughts. Do you see how that doesn't work?
That's my assumption, that would be what God could do.
We're not.
Then you should have never made that claim.
We're looking for
but I'm trying to figure these things out, and I think
assumption and a declaration is not what we're looking for. We need you to defend the conclusion you've reached.
I believe that it would benefit atheists to allow for there to be further talkings about God as if God was real.
I did that for 28 years, bro.
You're talking to a former pastor and a former gonna-be pastor. How dare you come in and pretend to be giving advice to atheists about how we should leave it open. I'm absolutely open to the possibility of God. I'm not saying it is possible. I am open to being convinced that it's possible. You don't just get to assume that it's possible. So here we go. I've got one question, Michael. This is very important. Can you demonstrate that God is possible?
If I could demonstrate that, why would you not think that I was God?
What?
Michael, I'm going to take you off mute one last time so that you can admit defeat and say goodbye. Because the question I asked you was, can you demonstrate that God is possible? And your response was to basically say no, but you did it by saying, if I could do that, you'd have to conclude I'm God. No, I can demonstrate things that are possible without being God. I can demonstrate that things are possible without being able to do it myself. You don't understand logic, you don't understand philosophy, you don't understand epistemology, and you don't even understand possibility. So, last chance, can you demonstrate that God is possible? Yes or no?
If God did not allow evil, could you demonstrate what evil?
I'm sorry. I'm going to mute you again, and we're going to try this again. And whether you get to say more than one word depends on the one word you say. If you're going to act like a child, I'm going to treat you like a child. So here's the question. Yes or no, can you demonstrate that God is possible?
I feel like we haven't even had a conversation, Matt. I mean,
Goodbye.
Yep.
When I say yes or no, the reason we didn't have a conversation is because you suck at it.
Yeah.
The reason we didn't have a conversation is because at every opportunity when Darante and I were trying to move you in a direction where you said something that was cogent, comprehensible, or useful, you kept going back into God speak and your confusion. Go back and listen. You used incomplete sentences multiple times, left hanging there. And all we're saying is, I have no reason to think that God is even possible. Can you demonstrate that he is? Because your answer seems to be no, but you seem terrified of saying that. If you'd have just said no, you would have gotten to continue in the conversation. But if you're going to be dishonest and try to, oh, you're not letting me talk. Bullshit, you fucking liar. We did let you talk. We're just not going to let you bloviate and make claims that you don't defend.
Mm-hmm.
If God is possible, that's a good starting point to demonstrate then that God is a probable explanation for something. And then once you demonstrate that it's possible and probable, then we can figure out whether or not God is there. But if you can't demonstrate that God is possible, you know, on some level, that ends the entire discussion. If you don't even have a way to demonstrate that it's possible. If we came across, like, for example, when you were talking about Terminator.
Yeah.
Is it possible to demonstrate that Kyle Reese is from the future?
Ooh. Oh,
does John Connor have good evidentiary justification to believe that Kyle Reese is from the future? Probably not. But there are things that Kyle says that consistently demonstrate reliability, and the threat is demonstrably real. So it almost doesn't matter whether he's from the future. Can we demonstrate that time travel is possible? Well, there may be things that, I mean, the movie skips over that because it's not a philosophy piece. It's an action movie that's, just cool. But
yeah.
if I were sitting there with Kyle and with John Connor, I wouldn't believe that he's from the future until I had good reason to believe that. I also would not believe he's definitely not from the future. That's impossible because I don't know that it's impossible.
Yeah.
And so I would be in a position where I would say, I don't know, but what can you do to try to demonstrate that you at least have knowledge of the future? Maybe he's never not from the future. Maybe he just sees the future. Maybe he's delusional, broke out of an insane asylum, but he accurately sees the future. When you have a phenomenon and you're trying to explain it, you have to make a list of candidate explanations. If we come across a dead body in the trunk of somebody's car, we can make a list of candidate explanations about who potentially did this or whatever else. At no point when we're listing the candidate explanations is, oh yeah, God did it. That doesn't get to get included. We also don't get to say, oh yeah, a ghost did it. Fairies did it.
Mhm.
Time travelers did it. We don't get to consider those as candidate explanations until someone demonstrates that they are possible, plausible, and probable, and then they become candidate explanations. And Christians and Muslims and Jews and Scientologists and, well, maybe not them as much, but basically all the people who believe in gods, they want to skip all of that, all of the valuable demonstration of why this is a candidate explanation, and go right to, you don't get to rule it out. You don't get to rule God out. Yeah, but you don't get to rule him in. I'm not ruling God out. I'm saying until you rule him in, he has no weight. And until some God gives me 5 minutes of his time, he deserves none of mine.
Thank you for watching that clip. If you enjoyed it, perhaps you should join us.
Join us.
Join us.
Join us.
Join us.
Join us.
At patreon.com/calltheline.